solve Georgia's election problems. We're looking at that possibility.
11 Alive News Primetime on the ATL starts now.
We begin with a Facebook video from Clayton County that's getting attention now all over the country. It shows a police officer holding several boys at gunpoint. It's already been viewed more than 500,000 times, Aisha.
However, Cheryl, it only shows a portion of what happened. Tonight, both sides are giving new details on what led up to this and how it ended. It started with a 911 call yesterday from a gas station worker reporting some kids with a gun at the store.
They came back again in the parking lot, and they're fighting outside in the parking lot.
Anyone else have any weapons? From a gas station worker reporting some kids with a gun. Newly released surveillance video shows what the worker was seeing going on outside the store. Police say the responding officer found a group of kids nearby that matched the 911 call's description. Today, police released multiple officers' body cam video that appears at the kids and a crowd cams. The video is 15 minutes long. From a gas station worker reporting some kids with a gun at the video outside the store.
Nobody's hurt. Please, I don't want to hurt one of y'all. Stand by. Young man, don't move! Why does this guy think one of y'all have a gun? Okay, then we good. We good. Don't move. Daddy, I need a 73. I got a crowd forming on me. Relax, guys. Don't worry about them. Don't worry about them. Back up. You ain't got nothing to do with this. You ain't got nothing to do with this. We've had a good conversation, all right? Don't pay no attention to the crowd. All right, y'all just relax. Y'all know why I'm here. I told you why I'm here, right? All right, so don't pay no attention to them. I'm not Superman. I can't see through their clothes. I'm not checking by myself, guys. I'm 1 against 5. Because I'm being safe.
I'm sorry, I don't see anything wrong with that officer's handling of that situation. And if you say something's wrong with me, as a nigga, I don't give a fuck what you talking about. In my opinion, take color out of the situation and all the shit, it was handled correctly. As well as it could be. Georgia Sheriff Rayshard Brooks shooting was justified? Really?
EJ, always. EJ, always. EJ, always. EJ, always. Hey everybody, it's your Uncle EJ, always your mother's brother and your grandmother's good-looking son and your grandmother's good-looking son. Math Hopper went live tonight. My head does not have a hat on it. And here's what we know. We know they had smoothies. She got in the cab. She took a shower. She took some clothes home. We don't know nothing. We tuned in. Math told us to tune in to hear truth. And we didn't hear anything. We heard Math be upset at us all for being in live that he invited us to. He was upset that he had 5,000 people watching as opposed to the 200 to 1,000 that he usually has. Of course, everyone knows if you have a car wreck, people are going to line up to see that shit. Now, I didn't necessarily expect to hear anything from him except that he told us we were going to hear the truth, so I went there expecting to hear that. Instead, I heard, like, you know, the Pop Juice album, some other stuff that he was working on. It was like, you know, Math Hopper versus Math Hopper. I don't know, but we listened to a bunch of songs. Math chastised us for being there for the wrong reason, and then commenced to say that the last thing.
Safe to say, I mean, as I did take a glance at the situation, yes, he gave a grim or a beat around the bush explanation due to the fact I say, because if we were to listen to it again right now, he said, the first thing he said is, the last time I seen her, we went to the such and such place and had smoothies. She was taking too long. I went outside and I paid for her cab and she went home. And then he said she came, she met my family. Like, we had smoothies and she went home. He said she took my shorts and my shirt after taking a shower. Like, we had smoothies. So the part what this man is saying is true, in fact, to the fact that you're not telling them, you're not saying anything, my nigga. Like, okay, y'all had smoothies, she came and met your family, but is that how the line of events went, nigga? Or how did the line of events went? She came, she got off the Greyhound, you went and picked her up, y'all went back to the house, she met the family, y'all sat down, watched a movie, ate for a little bit, went to your room and kicked it, she slept, she didn't sleep, so forth, took a shower. Like you said, she took your shorts and your shirt after taking a shower. Why did she take a shower? Did she come there saying, hey, I haven't took a shower since yesterday, is it okay if I take a shower and borrow a change of clothes? Or did y'all? And afterwards, she had to take a shower to get herself, you know, back refreshing, like, so forth. You dig what I'm saying? Like, if she's saying that this situation happened and you trying to say ain't nothing happened like that, due to the fact that you've already said that she took your clothes after taking a shower, throws in the reason of why did she take a shower. Therefore, she was in the vicinity of you at some time. Like, and that's the kind of shit they gonna be at. So when it comes to me just watching that video and listening to his, yeah, it was a hell of a beat around the bush explanation of what took place. Because otherwise, the way he would, she came over, I picked her up, or she caught a Uber over. We had dinner and played some video games and so forth. Talked about a lot of things, and then she decided she wanted to go home, and so then she left. Or she played video games, talked, whatever. She said she'd stay the night. She stayed the night. Ooh, but when she stayed the night, you gave no kind of details of that kind of thing, in that type of form or fashion. So I just hate that it's so easy for motherfuckers to end up in that type of a situation. Both sides. Whether it's a fella that does that to a female, or a female that's lying and saying a man did that. Either way, it's too easy of a situation to end up to, not knowing who is that person that's gonna do some dumb shit like that to you.
You remember that bird was putting her in a cab, that they had smoothies together. Excuse me. She met his mom. She took a shower. They had smoothies together. She couldn't choose a flavor smoothie, so he left her, and then somehow she gave him a kiss on the cheek and got in the cab. What Matt did not tell us was why she was there. Did they have a sexual relationship? Why was she using the shower? Did they spend the night together?
See, this is just logical shit. Like, you give some type of information. That information, if a person knows how to can hear and can read and understand something, then that information is going to raise a question about how that piece of information came about. And so, therefore, you said she took your shorts and your shirt, and you said that in the sense of, bruh, she left here, she took my shorts and my shirt, like, after taking a shower. Like, shit was cool. I don't understand. Like, she was wearing my clothes when she left here. Well, that means there was a reason that she came out of her clothes. That's crazy.
Were they just friends? The purpose of her being there? Was there any intercourse? Was there anything that gave him the implication that after he left and put her in a cab that he paid for and didn't talk to her for a week, that she would now be saying that he raped her? If she did indeed take a shower, how did she even possibly get a rape kit that would even have his DNA in it? If that's still the same question, like it just left a bunch of answers. But here's my thing.
It left a bunch of questions unanswered.
When you claim something extraordinary, and I know a lot of the ladies of the BRC, feel hurt. They feel like men are sticking up for Matt Hoffa. And I'm not sticking up for Matt Hoffa. Like, I don't know. I still don't know what the hell is going on. I know we have a woman that accused a man of rape, and a man who basically saying, they were together, they did have a smoothie, he met his mom, but he left us with a whole bunch of more questions. But the thing is this, she's making the claim. She tagged JC and numerous battle rappers, Beef, Smack, all these battle rappers. She put us in the middle of this. So if you're making this claim and you're going to put this man's name out there, if you're going to put his brand out there, if you're going to put his reputation out there, the onus is on you to prove what you're saying. If you've had conversations with police, if Math has had conversations with police, if you have conversations that are recorded, or you have receipts to back up what you say, you need to show us something. You can't simply make a claim and expect for us to just all come right to your rescue. I know there are situations where men do take advantage of women. I know there are situations where men are sexual predators. I know there are situations where men do rape women. But I know there's also situations where women do lie. I know there's situations where women do go dig. I know there's situations where men do seek out men who have, who have a certain standing in order to take advantage of them. These things happen on both sides. From either one of these two parties, I haven't got anything that's sufficient enough to make a logical conclusion on what the hell happened.
Did I not say that? See, that's what I mean. I live in my own little box of a world and all this shit. Well, I'm happy I do. And those who don't understand my mind or understand me or think there's something wrong, that's your problem. I don't know what to say or do about that, because I'm by far nowhere near ignorant. And common sense ain't common, and that's something I do have, as well as intelligence. I might not be able to articulate my conversation all the time the way as I would like to, but I'll be knowing what I'm talking about when I be talking about what I know about shit. Oh boy.
When it happened, you got some people blogging talking about that the police went to her and talked to her and then came and talked to Math and then came back talked to her, and Math is saying he never even talked to police, but these people are supposedly taking up for Math, saying they got statements that say to the contrary. Where is that proof? You got people saying that somehow Bonnie Godai was involved. Where is that proof? How did she get put in this? You got people that saying Beasley got something to do with it. Where is that proof? What does he have to do with it? Because Beasley doesn't like something, he's going to commission someone to yell rape at that person? That's what the hell we doing? That's the stretch we doing? Like, none of this shit makes no sense. And I apologize to the young lady who's obviously hurting and whose story sounds heartfelt and may very well be true. But if it is, you have to prove that point. You have to give us something to go on, because we're not just going to go attack this man and flame him up based on you just saying something. If you were involved with another man and the woman came up to you and said, hey, me and your man have been sleeping together, you ask your man and he says, no, we haven't. At that point, the onus is on that lady to prove that somehow your man and her have been having a sexual relationship. It's not on him anymore. So even though Math didn't satisfy a lot of things that I wanted him to satisfy or didn't answer, it's not up to him to prove that he did not rape anyone, or we would have to prove that shit to people all day long. If you have been raped, if you have been sexually assaulted, if you have been touched, whatever has been done to you, you need to tell someone in order to prove that that has happened. You can't simply yell fire in a theater. You can't. You can't.
That's just crazy. Like I said. I wish I could just get away from hearing all this negative shit. YouTube is filled with so much negative shit in my recommendations. My recommendations is filled with just so much negative news, negative this. Well, I want to learn something, so.
This is Audible. Present.
Y'all didn't hear me hear that. Man, I don't want to start something. I gotta walk my dog. Now I'm gonna have to start it over. Oh. I'm gonna listen to this, but y'all get to start off without me.
Recorded Books Incorporated presents an unabridged recording of Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, narrated by Frank Muller. This work is copyrighted 1976 by Anne Rice. This recording is copyrighted 1994 by Recorded Books Incorporated.
Fuck, y'all gonna start off without me.
Book 1 of the Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire.
I'll be back.
I see, said the vampire thoughtfully. And slowly he walked across the room towards the window. For a long time he stood there against the dim light from Divisadero Street and the passing beams of traffic. The boy could see the furnishings of the room more clearly now. The round oak table, the chairs, a wash basin hung on one wall with a mirror. He set his briefcase on the table and waited. "But how much tape do you have with you?" asked the vampire, turning now so the boy could see his profile. "Enough for the story of a life?" "Sure, if it's a good life. Sometimes I interview as many as 3 or 4 people a night, if I'm lucky. But it has to be a good story. That's only fair, isn't it?" "Admirably fair," the vampire answered. "I would like to tell you the story of my life, then. I would like to do that very much." "Great," said the boy. And quickly he removed the small tape recorder from his briefcase, making a check of the cassette and the batteries. "I'm really anxious to hear why you believe this. Why you know," said the vampire abruptly. "We can't. Is your equipment ready?" "Yes," said the boy. "Then sit down. I'm going to turn on the overhead light." But I thought vampires didn't like light, said the boy. If you think the dark adds to the atmosphere... But then he stopped. The vampire was watching him with his back to the window. The boy could make out nothing of his face now, and something about the still figure there distracted him. He started to say something again, but he said nothing. And then he sighed with relief when the vampire moved towards the table and reached for the overhead cord. At once the room was flooded with a harsh yellow light, and the boy staring up at the vampire could not repress a gasp. His fingers danced backwards on the table to grasp the edge. "Dear God," he whispered. And then he gazed, speechless, at the vampire. The vampire was utterly white and smooth, as if he were sculpted from bleached bone, and his face was as seemingly inanimate as a statue, except for two brilliant green eyes that looked down at the boy intently, like flames in a skull. But then the vampire smiled almost wistfully, and the smooth white substance of his face moved with the infinitely flexible but minimal lines of a cartoon. "Do you see?" he asked softly. The boy shuddered, lifting his hand as if to shield himself from a powerful light. His eyes moved slowly over the finely tailored black coat he'd only glimpsed in the bar, the long folds of the cape, the black silk tie knotted at the throat, and the gleam of the white collar that was as white as the vampire's flesh. He stared at the vampire's full black hair, the waves that were combed back over the tips of the ears, the curls that barely touched the edge of the white collar. "Now do you still want the interview?" the vampire asked. The boy's mouth was open before the sound came out. He was nodding. Then he said, "Yes." The vampire sat down, slowly, opposite him, and leaning forward said, gently, confidentially, "Don't be afraid. Just start the tape." And then he reached out over the length of the table. The boy recoiled, sweat running down the sides of his face. The vampire clamped a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Believe me, I won't hurt you. I want this opportunity. It's more important to me than you can realize now. I want you to begin." And he withdrew his hand and sat, collected, waiting. It took a moment for the boy to wipe his forehead and his lips with a handkerchief, to stammer that the microphone was in the machine, to press the button, to say that the machine was on. "You weren't always a vampire, were you?" he began. "No," answered the vampire. "I was a 25-year-old man when I became a vampire, and the year was 1791. The boy was startled by the preciseness of the date, and he repeated it before he asked, "How did it come about?" "There's a simple answer to that. I don't believe I want to give simple answers," said the vampire. "I think I want to tell the real story." "Yes," the boy said quickly. He was folding his handkerchief over and over and wiping his lips now with it again. "There was a tragedy," the vampire started. "It was my younger brother. He died." And then he stopped so that the boy cleared his throat and wiped at his face again before stuffing the handkerchief almost impatiently into his pocket. "It's not painful, is it?" he asked timidly. "Does it seem so?" asked the vampire. "No." He shook his head. "It's simply that I've only told this story to one other person. And that was so long ago. No, it's not painful. We were living in Louisiana then. We'd received a land grant, and settled 2 indigo plantations on the Mississippi, very near New Orleans. Ah, that's the accent, the boy said softly. For a moment, the vampire stared blankly. I have an accent? He began to laugh. And the boy, flustered, answered quickly, I noticed it in the bar when I asked you what you did for a living. It's just a slight sharpness to the consonants, that's all. I never guessed it was French. It's all right, the vampire assured him. I'm not as shocked as I pretend to be. It's only that I forget it from time to time. But let me go on. Please, said the boy. I was talking about the plantations. They had a great deal to do with it, really, my becoming a vampire. But I'll come to that. Our life there was both luxurious and primitive. And we ourselves found it extremely attractive. You see, we lived far better there than we could have ever lived in France. Perhaps the sheer wilderness of Louisiana only made it seem so, but seeming so it was. I remember the imported furniture that cluttered the house. The vampire smiled. And the harpsichord. That was lovely. My sister used to play it. On summer evenings she would sit at the quays with her back to the open French windows, and I can still remember that thin, rapid music, and the vision of the swamp rising beyond her, the moss-hung cypresses floating against the sky. And there were the sounds of the swamp, a chorus of creatures, the cry of the birds. I think we loved it. It made the rosewood furniture all the more precious, the music more delicate and desirable. Even when the wisteria tore the shutters off the attic windows and worked its tendrils right into the whitewashed brick in less than a year. Yes, we loved it. All except my brother. I don't think I ever heard him complain of anything, but I knew how he felt. My father was dead then, and I was head of the family, and I had to defend him constantly from my mother and sister. They wanted to take him visiting and to New Orleans for parties, but he hated these things. I think he stopped going altogether before his leather-bound Lives of the Saints. Finally, I built him an oratory removed from the house, and he began to spend most of every day there, and often the early evening. It was ironic, really. He was so different from us, so different from everyone, and I was so regular. There was nothing extraordinary about me whatsoever. The vampire smiled. Sometimes in the evening I would go out to him and find him in the garden near the oratory, sitting absolutely composed on a stone bench there. And I'd tell him my troubles, the difficulties I had with the slaves, how I distrusted the overseer or the weather or my brokers, all the problems that made up the length and breadth of my existence. And he would listen, making only a few comments, always sympathetic, so that when I left him I had the distinct impression he had solved everything for me. I didn't think I could deny him anything, and I vowed that no matter how it would break my heart to lose him, he could enter the priesthood when the time came. Of course, I was wrong. The vampire stopped. For a moment the boy only gazed at him, and then he started as if awakened from deep thought, and he floundered as if he could not find the right words. He didn't want to be a priest? The boy asked. The vampire studied him, as if trying to discern the meaning of his expression. Then he said, I meant that I was wrong about myself, about my not denying him anything. His eyes moved over the far wall and fixed on the panes of the window. He began to see visions. Real visions? The boy asked. But again there was hesitation, as if he were thinking of something else. "I didn't think so," the vampire answered. "It happened when he was 15. He was very handsome then. He had the smoothest skin, the largest blue eyes. He was robust, not thin as I am now, and was then. But his eyes, it was as if when I looked into his eyes, I was standing alone on the edge of the world, on a windswept ocean beach. There was nothing but the soft roar of the waves." "Well," he said, his eyes still fixed on the window panes, "he began to see visions. He only hinted at this at first, and he stopped taking his meals altogether. He lived in the oratory. At any hour of the day or night I could find him on the bare flagstones, kneeling before the altar. And the oratory itself was neglected. He stopped tending the candles, or changing the altar cloths, or even sweeping out the leaves. One night I became really alarmed when I stood in the rose arbor watching him for 1 solid hour, during which he never moved from his knees, and never once lowered his arms, which he held outstretched in the form of a cross. The slaves all thought he was mad." The vampire raised his eyebrows in wonder. "I was convinced that he was only overzealous, that in his love for God he had perhaps gone too far. Then he told me about the visions. Both St. Dominic and the Blessed Virgin Mary had come to him in the oratory. They had told him he was to sell all our property in Louisiana, everything we owned, and use the money to do God's work in France. My brother was to be a great religious leader, to return the country to its former fervor, to turn the tide against atheism and the revolution. Of course he had no money of his own. I was to sell the plantations and our townhouses in New Orleans and give the money to him." Again the vampire stopped, and the boy sat motionless, regarding him, astonished. Excuse me," he whispered. "What did you say? Did you sell the plantations?" "No," said the vampire, his face calm as it had been from the start. "I laughed at him, and he became incensed. He insisted his command came from the Virgin herself. Who was I to disregard it?" Softly, as if he were thinking of this again. Who indeed? And the more he tried to convince me, the more I laughed. It was nonsense, I told him, the product of an immature and even morbid mind. The oratory was a mistake, I said to him. I would have it torn down at once. He would go to school in New Orleans and get such inane notions out of his head. I don't remember all that I said, but I remember the feeling. Behind all this contemptuous dismissal on my part was a smoldering anger and a disappointment. I was bitterly disappointed. I didn't believe him at all. "But that's understandable," said the boy quickly when the vampire paused, his expression of astonishment softening. "I mean, would anyone have believed him?" "Is it so understandable?" The vampire looked at the boy. "I think perhaps it was vicious egotism. Let me explain. I loved my brother, as I told you, and at times I believed him to be a living saint. I encouraged him in his prayer and meditations, as I said, and I was willing to give him up to the priesthood. And if someone had told me of a saint in Arles or Lourdes who saw visions, I would have believed it. I was a Catholic. I believed in saints. I lit tapers before their marble statues in churches. I knew their pictures, their symbols, their names. But I couldn't believe my brother. Not only did I not believe he saw visions, I couldn't entertain the notion for a moment. Now, why? Because he was my brother. Holy he might be, peculiar most definitely, but Francis of Assisi, no. Not my brother. No brother of mine could be such. That is egotism. Do you see? The boy thought about it before he answered, and then he nodded and said that yes, he thought that he did. Perhaps he saw the visions, said the vampire. Then you don't claim to know now whether he did or not? No. But I do know that he never wavered in his conviction for a second. That I know now, and knew then, the night he left my room, crazed and grieved. He never wavered for an instant. And within minutes he was dead. How? The boy asked. He simply walked out of the French doors onto the gallery and stood for a moment at the head of the brick stairs, and then he fell. He was dead when I reached the bottom, his neck broken. The vampire shook his head in consternation, but his face was still serene. "Did you see him fall?" asked the boy. "Did he lose his footing?" "No, but 2 of the servants saw it happen. They said that he had looked up, as if he had just seen something in the air. Then his entire body moved forward, as if being swept by a wind. One of them said he was about to say something when he fell. I thought that he was about to say something too, but it was at that moment I turned away from the window. My back was turned when I heard the noise." He glanced at the tape recorder. "I could not forgive myself. I felt responsible for his death," he said. "And everyone else seemed to think I was responsible also." "But how could they? You said they saw him fall." "It wasn't a direct accusation. They simply knew that something had passed between us that was unpleasant, that we had argued minutes before the fall. The servants had heard us. My mother had heard us. My mother would not stop asking me what had happened, and why my brother, who was so quiet, had been shouting. Then my sister joined in, and of course I refused to say. I was so bitterly shocked and miserable that I had no patience with anyone, only the vague determination they would not know about his visions. They would not know that he had become finally not a saint, but only a fanatic. My sister went to bed rather than face the funeral, and my mother told everyone in the parish that something horrible had happened in my room, which I would not reveal, and even the police questioned me on the word of my own mother. Finally, the priest came to see me and demanded to know what had gone on. I told no one. "It was only a discussion," I said. "I was not on the gallery when he fell," I protested, and they all stared at me as if I'd killed him. And I felt that I'd killed him. I sat in the parlor beside his coffin for 2 days, thinking I had killed him. I stared at his face until spots appeared before my eyes, and I nearly fainted. The back of his skull had been shattered on the pavement, and his head had the wrong
Subscription to Audible was only good for one listen. That's weird. And I should have listened to the book Dope Fiend instead of Black Girl Lost. Not that I don't love Black Girl Lost, but due to the fact that it's hella short compared to Dope Fiend. But I think I own it now, so I should be able to listen to Black Girl Lost whenever the fuck I want to. Wait, yeah, no thanks. Continue. Right. Because I think I'm gonna buy Dope Fiend and Sweet St. Louis. How much is Sweet St. Louis though? Of course, they don't have. Fuck, I Want Sweet St. Louis by Omar Tyree. I want that book so bad. Donald Goines, I want Daddy Cool. Horse, I want Horson. Dope Fiend. Daddy Cool. And Black Girl Lost. Hard copies. Cost $11.99. Want to listen to the sample because they gonna give a sample from chapter 6 in the middle of it. Like 3 paragraphs in the middle of a chapter. I could make a channel for audibles, like, but then they wouldn't let me monetize that because of copyright laws for it being somebody else's book. But I got the lab right here. I can just sit here and just read, narrate the book. I wish I knew how to apply to see if I could get that as a job. I would love that. Godfather. Ooh, 14 hours. Wow. Save that. YermCity Hoodlum was good too. Nigga, Trick Baby the movie? They made a movie out of Trick Baby? You ain't gotta scream at me.
In the last 2 months of his life, Dr. King faced the idea that civil rights alone could not solve the problem of poverty.
In Mississippi today.
He roamed the South, trying to gain support for Poor People's Campaign. Its goals: full employment, a guaranteed income, and decent housing for every American.
People just don't know, but it's really hard. Not only me, it's so many more in the same shape. I'm not the only one. It's just so many of us run around, just don't have shoes, clothes. It's naked and home. So all the time you have to cook your pinch over beans morning down in the south. You don't know what else get a good meal.
You all are really to be admired. And I want you to know that you have my moral support. I'm going to be praying for you. I'm going to be coming back to see you. And we are going to be demanding, when we go to Washington, that something be done, and done immediately, about these conditions.
This was a different Martin Luther King. Just weeks before his murder, in tone suggested
Fuck, man. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I still look happy as fuck, huh? God, this shit. Is litty. Fucking right, dude.
Cause you been in your body like a Birkin.
What the fuck was he saying?
Shawty bring it back, I can turn it up. Do it for these bands, baby, run it up. Love the way you do it, I can't get enough.
Shit was going, but please forgive me. But I'm just not a promoter of do it for these bands. I'm gonna make it rain on you. Like, it's one thing to spoil you know. What about you doing some shit for this money? You don't do that for me. You do that for them. Like, yeah. You do it for me because you want to do it for me, not for these bands. What the fuck? So they killed me. They killed the hood. I mean, they killed that with that. Be my Bonnie because you want to rock with me and be my Bonnie, but don't be my Bonnie because you only doing it for the bands. You know what I'm saying? Don't twerk for me for the bands. Twerk for me because you twerk for work for me because you and so forth. Throw you some bands, it ain't cause you twerked for me. It's cause I'm throwing you some bands. Because I'm throwing you some money. Because I'm doing shit.
Look, it's a bird. No, it's a plane. No.
I've been on the low, yeah, I've been on the cover. Grey goose in the mix got me.
Did it start off with saying I've been on the low, I've been undercover? Why would you start off like that? And you see, I've been on the low, I've been undercover. You're on the low, huh? Yeah, not my song.
Beatplanet.com.
I got plans to be a star. I can see my name in the lights from afar. I never had.
Like, this is the beat with a hook that you made somebody to grasp and be like, this is gonna be your radio jam. And so you think a radio hit consists of like saying how you dream of being a star? Now, I'm only because you don't know how many of them songs or these there, and I ain't listened to no SoundClick beats in hella long. But back when I used to be on the search through the SoundClick beats and the ones with hooks, there's hella this is my night, and we're gonna. The hella champion ass, like, I am a champion. I am the one. Shut the fuck up. Like, god damn it. Nah, I'm playing, but no, I'm not. Like, nah, you can be, but that just for real. Listen to this. Hold on. It don't sound hella like a Nickelodeon talent show song.
BBBBplanet.com.
What's that one show that used to be on? Was it on Nickelodeon or was it on Disney? I think it was damn near Nickelodeon. Whatever the case was, they was like in high school, but them motherfuckers was like always performing or some shit. Like they was a little group, I don't know if they was a rock group or something, but they was always performing through lunchtimes and shit. They did that shit on Saved by the Bell shit too. But this is one of them TV show ass songs.
I got plans to be a star. I can see my name in the lights from afar. Things I never had, will be mine.
It's a little mama song. Lip Gloss Poppin' Junior. My bad, y'all. Get the fuck out of my mind there. Stars, you bitch. I only need 2 more stars and I'm in it. Hot, did it, yeah, with it. Shit, get it. That was.
We got issues. Is it official? We got issues. Hope we live to another day. 'Cause I miss you. Yeah, I miss you every day. Is it official? Turning the other way. We got
Produced by Promote.
You never met a nigga fly as me. You never known a nigga hot as me. Still waiting for some love from the industry. The same loving I get when I'm in the street.
That was no.
I got the faces on my mind. I'm dreaming every night. I got the something in my mind. It's I got the
I don't even know why I listened to it that long.
Ooh, exclusive DJ beats. All I ask is let me love you.
Bitch, can I play?
I ain't gonna lie, girl, you know I want it now. I know what you like, baby, I can show you how. I'll put you in a mood, shawty, let's break down that switch. She crazy for the Henny, so we sippin' on that liquor, so we sippin' on that liquor, sippin' on that liquor, so we sippin' on that liquor, sippin' on that liquor, so we sippin' on that liquor, sippin' on that liquor. She crazy for the Henny, so we sippin' on that liquor.
It's alright.
This should be played at high volume.
Crack a lack on the track.
Motherfucker, I'm ill. Motherfucker, I'm ill.
Did he do a good job there?
Williams beats.
She bring it back, it's raw talent. Riding on the beam, baby, got me all balanced. I've been through your love, now I want a new challenge. Had to taste me something else, and now I got a new palette. I can sing like Uzi too, you got a new paddock. And some harder shit, fusing to the only one laughing. Now it's just confusing, you don't love me, so what happened?
Case the producer. Purchase your tracks.
We be making moves, no mistakes. I'm just tryna put food on my plate. Why does my success for you with hate? Hey, 100% started.
I get on your nerves, Jay.
Ballin', I'm making it easy. Trapping the deck till I die, I'm feeling like cheesy. Got a bad bitch in the room, she ain't tryna tease me. Got a bad bitch in the room, she ain't tryna please me. Yeah. Ballin', I'm making it look easy. Ballin', trapping until I die, I'm feeling like cheesy. Yeah. Got a bad bitch, she ain't tryna tease me. Got a bad bitch in the room, she just tryna please me. Yeah.
I get on your nerves, Jay.
Oh, Fred Nice on the hook too? Okay. Fred Nice, I fucks with Fred Nice. Fred Nice hooks be going.
I get on your nerves, Jay.
But he says,
Ballin', I'm making it easy. Trapping the deck till I die, I'm feeling like cheesy. Got a bad bitch in the room, she ain't tryna tease me. Got a bad bitch in the room, she just tryna please me. Yeah. Ballin', I'm making it look easy. Ballin', trapping until I die, I'm feeling like cheesy. Yeah. Got a bad bitch, she ain't tryna tease me. Got a bad bitch in the room, she just tryna please me. Yeah.
I get on your nerves, Jay.
that I get on your nerves, Jay.
Once it clears up the sky, then we throwing up some more. I got money on my mind. Don't act like you ain't know. Just do that thing right. Swear it's all about the money. Money. Swear it's all about the money. Money. Swear it's all about money. Money. Swear it's all about the money.
It cannot be all about the money, but if you don't, like, you throwing it in you throwing it up, and then when it's done being in the air, it's all on the floor, you throwing up some more. But it's all about the money. Like, and I'm throwing it up. Like, that symbolizes, like, throwing it. I don't give a fuck. I got so much money. Because, like, people aren't really just sitting in their house just with their money just... They only do that when the camera's on and they want to, you know, for the Instagram. But, yeah, so... no.
Cindy B on the track.
For a simple beat, just on some fruit shit.
Or buy exclusive rights to this beat today. Or buy exclusive rights to this beat today. Or buy exclusive rights to this beat today.
Sound like me singing. Fuck this beat up. Good game, good game, good game. Trying to win this bitch, hitting all corner pockets. I'm not listening to this bitch. It just became a background out of nowhere. Just in case you was like, oh, that's the beat he like.
Emotional Productions. We make what you need. Necklace around you, you got me tied up. Run this circle around you, that's some shit that I'm tired of. I've been watching.
You are now listening to an Breezy and Heavyweight Beats collaboration.
That's that Usher. It's 7 o'clock on the dot, and I'm cruising the street. Oh yeah, I got this real pretty little thing that's waiting for me. I pull up. To put my hands in place that kind of thing that you know what I mean.
Girl, I just wanna take it nice and slow.
What I told you. But no.
So tell me what you wanna do. I'm here for you, girl. You just gotta let me know. So I just wanna take it nice and slow. Girl, tell me what you wanna do. I'm here for you, so you just gotta let me know. And I'll take it nice and slow.
What? How dare you disrespect that motherfucking song like that? I'm so mad, but I'm proud of myself at the same time. I knew, but God damn it, for real. For one, that that's the only thing that gave it away, and that was like, it didn't even like sound like a new improved. It really just sounded like a copycat, and you couldn't find the right sound to have the same sound. Instead of somebody doing like, I'm gonna use a different sound, a more up to date, new sound I created, but using the same do. Like, no, you're sounding like do. Like, you know what I'm saying? And then that hook, what the fuck? So I just wanna take it nice and slow. So let me let you know. So let me know what you wanna do, cause I'm here for you. So you know what? Huh? Shut the fuck up. Trying to say saying some super basic shit. Like, I'm sorry, my bad. But that's what you gotta do when you shopping for beats, when you listening to beats, when you shopping for what you know what I'm saying, gonna create something. You gotta listen to that shit like, is this what I would hear on the radio if I was not involved with it? Is this what I would hear as a hit? Like, is this...
I gave you my all like you wanted, but you let me fall like I was nothing. I should've known better. I was in my head, I thought that it could last forever. And I don't know why, yeah. And I don't know.
Like, it sounds like some random shit,
Hold up, they know that the hot truck while controlling the treating the haters like traffic in a pile up. I'm crowd rocking and show with skills, elevate the mind within a stack of pills. Let's break the seals, man, that's for real. Make it creepy, these words like
keep that juice box wet. She keep that juice box wet for me. Is there any way, well, an empty juice box would be dry. I don't know why it just sounds should keep that juice box wet for me. I'm trying to think, is there a better way that could have been? Because I just automatically feel like, you know, juice box is wet because it's juice in the box. So to keep it wet is without saying, right? Because it's a juice box. But wouldn't it be better to say, in that sense, that you keep her Jewish wax wet? Because without you, it'd be dry. But you get it, you know, waterworks. Wouldn't that be a better... So it would have to be another way of saying the whole sentence, but I'm just saying, for the context of that to be the topic, that sound corny to me. She keep her juice box wet for me. Motherfucker better be wet, cause I know. And warm. Shit. And with grip.
I get my phone down.
You got a lot to grip on, so I shouldn't have no room to be going to the sides and nothing.
All of those men is spitting inside the mirror. She's really ready for what I'ma give her. Then we light up and now the vision's clearer. She's more than ready, I can tell we're going on. Yeah. We're gonna go on.
J-Ron, oh boy. I won't stop running 'cause I'm on loud. If I had that.
SinVStyle.com.
Bobby is
Where is the real, like, beat producers that motherfuckers is, like, sleep on, but, like, is amazing?
For classics, for classics.com. Classics.com. Classics.com.
I need a girl that beat pop every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop. I need a girl that beat pop every time the beat drop, every time the beat, every time the beat drop. I need a girl that beat pop every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop. I need a girl that beat pop every time the beat drop, every time the beat, every time the beat drop. I need a girl that beat pop every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop. I need a girl that beat pop every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop, every time the beat drop. I need a girl that beat pop every time the beat drop, every time the beat.
I can't tell what the fuck the hook is saying. The shit dope though. But what the fuck is it saying? Something to think about all the things that we can do. But what the fuck is that middle part? Baby girl. God damn it for doing that. Baby girl, you gotta want me too. But it reminds me of the bar that Rich Homie Quan said. And that nigga, he said, she said, Quan, you ain't gotta cheat when you got me. Think about all the things that we can do. But that's not the bar that he's using here. Yeah, so it sounds too. Baby girl, you gotta want me too. Please, can I have it? I found one, y'all. Shit. did pronounce your name correctly, right? Jamila. Am I tripping? Or is this motherfucking sample playing through the whole beat? I think I'm not tripping, but that sample was playing through the whole goddamn beat. Like there's no breakaway. Beat in order to get the version without just the one. Yeah, it's through the whole goddamn beat, cuz. Damn it, man. Shit not. And it's, and you know, yeah, you could go where you just rap over that. But then you rapping over it, and now people's ears is having to worry about trying to hear two at the same time, unless you make it in a unison where it, yeah, nah, fuck all that. God damn it, you got me, cause I didn't even notice at first. Good one. I was just knocking that shit, not even noticing. Wait, nigga, the beat ain't never just dropped and just had the beat. This nigga, that hook is just over and over and over and over. Oh, that shit's over. Damn, bruh. I thought I had one. Almost. Doesn't count.
I like the way you do your thing. I like the way you do your thing. I like the way you do your thing. The way you do your thing. There ain't no other girl the same. I like the way you do your thing. I like the way you do your thing. I like the way you do your thing. The way you do your thing.
No.
CJ got him running.
Oh, I've been thinking of you every weekend. Tell me you do. Tell me you do. Don't you feel you miss me? And you wanna kiss me? I feel it too. Baby, I feel it.
This is a microwave production.
Safe on the track. Safe beats.
Damn, these city lights are amazing. The sky is mine.
Property of the city. Property of the city.
Okay. Nothing tonight. That's alright. Maybe the mayor. see. What the fuck is you downloading? Because that shit ain't play nothing. I don't get it.
This is Audible.
Blackstone Audio presents Black Girl Lost by Donald Goines, narrated by Bonnie Turpin. Dedication. In the memory of a very good friend of mine, Archie Walker, who was killed at Detroit Metropolitan Airport on November 1st, 1973. Shot down in the parking lot by killers who didn't have the sense to get it for themselves. They had to try and take it from him. Chapter 1. The sounds coming from inside the house were more than just loud and helter-skelter. "You black motherfucker!" The cuss words seemed to fill the night air, whirling around the child, who stood shivering in Los Angeles' early March wind. Suddenly, the sound of a bottle breaking came to her. Next, many voices raised at once until another voice could be heard overriding the rest. The loud confusion that the people inside called partying was an everyday occurrence at the house, as the child well knew. This was not the first time she had come here looking for her mother. More often than not, her mother could be found in the Corn Whiskey House quicker than home. As the early morning wind whipped around and through the young child, she clutched the summer coat she wore more tightly to her. All the buttons were missing, and in places she had pins holding the coat together. But as was the problem with buttons, she didn't own enough pins to do the job properly. Even though she was cold and shivering and her teeth chattered, she still couldn't make up her mind whether or not to go in. She feared her mother's anger to such a degree that she had been standing outside for over an hour in the cold, waiting and hoping that her mother would come out by herself. The house was a small frame building with the dingy gray paint peeling. It sat back from the street, and there was a small concrete pathway that led up to the door. But in most places, the sidewalk was busted, On each side of the sidewalk leading up to the house were hedges, while in front of the house were bushes that stood as high or higher than a man standing straight up. The street light in front of the house was out, so the only light that penetrated the darkness was the little bit that came out from the tightly drawn shades of the house. But the darkness was not what the small child feared. After all, at home on many occasions their house had been in complete darkness because of an unpaid electric bill. Undecided, she stood there, shivering. For the 1000th time, she almost found the courage to enter the house and ask for her mother. What drove her on was the hunger pains that kept flashing across her stomach. She bent over double as a cramp hit her in the stomach. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she remembered her mother's words early that morning. "Now don't go out, Sandra. It's too cold out today. I'll bring back something for breakfast in a little while." At times, when her mother hadn't started drinking, Sandra felt an affection for her. But when her mother drank, which was the majority of the time, Sandra shied away from her mother in fear. She had received too many beatings from her mother when she had been drinking. Most of the times for nothing, for in her drunken condition she believed Sandra had disobeyed one of her orders earlier in the day. "Hi there, little sis." The voice coming from out of the darkness made Sandra jump. "What you doing out in all this cold by yourself?" the man asked kindly. But Sandra noticed a slur in it. From past experience, Sandra realized instantly that the man had been drinking. This would have surprised the man speaking to her because he knew he carried his whiskey well. Many grown women wouldn't have been able to recognize that he had taken a drink, let alone that he was loaded. So it didn't even cross his mind that the 9-year-old child in front of him was well aware that he had been drinking. "I'm waiting for my mother," Sandra said slowly, as she began to hope that here was a chance to get her mother out of the corn whiskey joint if she could get the man to go inside and get her out. "Oh, gal, you're wasting your time. Your mother went over to Little Joe's place about 2 hours ago," he said, hoping the child didn't know any better. He didn't even know the child's mother. He had stopped down here on Hooper Street since he was on the east side and decided to pick up a bottle of corn whiskey. He didn't really like the stuff, but he had met a woman who had just come to the West Coast from the South, and the woman swore she loved corn whiskey better than she did bonded whiskey. She wasn't the first person he'd met like that, though. Many people out of the South preferred drinking good corn whiskey to that which you could buy in the stores. Sandra moaned and leaned over in pain. She couldn't stop the tears. She didn't even know where Little Joe's place was, nor did she have any reason to doubt the man's words. "What you crying for?" he inquired softly, as he glanced around, hoping that the child's mother didn't come out the front door. "Mama was supposed to give me some money so that I could get something to eat," she answered honestly, hoping that the kind man would offer her a quarter or something near that sum. "Come along, child," he said, taking her firmly by the arm and leading her down the walkway. "I'll drive you around to Little Joe's place. Then you can get your mother. How does that sound?" It didn't sound too good at all to Sandra. Her mother would be furious at her for riding in a man's car, especially a man that she didn't know. She glanced up at the man. All men or women older than 15 were elderly to her. She tried, but she couldn't remember when or where she had seen him before. Her mother had so many men friends that it was hard to remember them all. Even her mother was hard pushed to remember every last one of them. This one was tall, dark-complexioned, with a heavy mustache. His eyes under deep black brows were pools of shimmering black ivory, now filled with a cunning lust. As the young girl hesitated, he added, "If your mother's not there, I'll stop and buy you a hamburger or something, okay?" As the cold wind blasted her thin coat open, she pulled her arm free to clutch the coat tightly. Hunger overcame reason, and she somehow found the nerve to say, I wish you would get me the hamburger first. I ain't ate since this morning. This was true. The man glanced at her. The coat, open now from the strong wind that kept blowing, revealed just how thin the child was. For a moment the man hesitated. His conscience disturbed him slightly. He knew that what he was about to do was wrong, but he had had just enough whiskey that night not to really care. It had been a long time since he'd had a young girl. He reached out and got another grip on her arm. He almost dragged her to the car. He opened the passenger side first and put her in, then almost ran around the car. He got in and started up the motor. The warmth from the heater quickly filled the car. Sandra sat back and relaxed. After being out in the cold so long, the heat felt good. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the warmth. The thin coat opened since she didn't have to clutch it around her, and she put her hands in her lap. Her eyes closed, but she managed to fight off the sleep. "You're a son of a bitch," the man said to himself as he observed the young kid next to him. With her coat open, he could see just how poor she was. Her legs were so thin that she seemed deformed. That coat with no buttons on it couldn't possibly keep the child warm, he reasoned. What kind of mother could the child have, he wondered, as he took his time and examined her. The mini dress she wore was too small, besides being a spring dress. He reached over and felt the material. The dress was stiff from being out in the cold. He pulled her across the seat and put his arm around her. She was so drowsy that she snuggled up against him. He put his arm around the child and held her protectively. As he touched her bare arm, he could feel how cold she was. Her teeth had begun to chatter uncontrollably. But as he held her tightly,
I don't get
she
that
relaxed.
accolade off the bank.
He started the car up and pulled away from the curb. He removed his arm from around her and dropped it down on her leg, only to remove it with shame. Her leg was so small that he could almost put his hand around her thigh.
Get your motherfucking hand off.
Basically, he was a decent sort of man. He was about to commit an act that he had never done before. He was also in the habit of talking to himself whenever he was alone. Now, with the child dozing beside him, he had time to think about what he was about to do. He decided to stop and get her something to eat first.
I know you're trying to express
She never woke up as he
how bad life was for the
parked in front of an all-night restaurant. He left the motor running so that she would be warm, ran into the restaurant, and ordered her a chicken dinner with mashed potatoes and navy beans. Then he ordered her a slice of apple pie with a small container of milk. He pulled away from the restaurant and drove until he found a dark side street. He parked on it and woke her up. "Here, Sandra," he said as he shook her awake. He waited until she wiped the sleep out of her eyes and then put the dinner in her lap. She blinked as she came awake. She could feel the hot dinner on her lap, but she was dreaming. She glanced up at the strange man, then back at the dinner on her lap. She opened it up slowly, and as she stared at the food, her stomach growled loudly, and tears ran down her cheek. Saliva ran out of the side of her mouth as she reached for the first piece of meat. The man, watching her out of the corner of his eye, began to really feel self-conscious as he realized that the child was really hungry. He wondered idly how long it had been since the kid had had a good meal. Had he asked, Sandra could have told him that it had been over 5 days since she'd had any kind of food similar to the dinner in her lap. She'd had hot dogs to eat, and her mother had made her a jelly sandwich for dinner 2 days past, but nothing like what she held in her lap. Her stomach growled again as she lit into the food. She didn't waste time with a fork or spoon. She picked up a handful of mashed potatoes and crammed them down her throat. She ate like an animal. The man had to look away, not in disgust, but in pity. As he watched the child, he realized he could never go through with what he had planned. There was no way now for him to take advantage of the child. He felt too much pity for her. She seemed to have caught too much hell already in life for him to come along and force himself on her. As he uncorked his whiskey bottle and took a long swig, he thought, how the hell could I ever have even thought about doing something to this child? He cursed at himself, and then the idea of some man attempting to take advantage of one of his daughters flashed across his mind. He had 3 of them, but they were all damn near grown now. He pictured them as they were when they were Sandra's age. The thought of a man attempting to do to one of them what he had started to do with Sandra filled him with rage. Then shame overcame him, and he couldn't think of enough things to do for the child. At first he toyed with the idea of taking her home, but in a minute he rejected that idea. It would never work, and besides, he'd be getting in trouble with the police if the child's mother complained about her missing. Next, he wished that he could meet Sandra's mother. He'd tell the sorry bitch a few things. As she finished with the dinner and licked her fingers, he removed the pie from the bag and gave it to her. She looked up at him with wonderment. Her big eyes seemed to swim with gratitude as she tried to smile at him. How old are you, child? He asked as he took another swig from the half-empty bottle. 8, she replied around a mouthful of pie. She ate the pie quickly, as if she was afraid someone would take it away from her. He gave her the milk and watched as she gulped it down. The man took another swig from the bottle, then dropped his hand down on her leg. He slowly ran it up her small thigh, feeling the heat that had now replaced the cold. He put his arm around her again and pulled her closer as she tried to clean up the mess she had made while eating. They sat in the car quietly, Sandra enjoying the heat, while the man allowed himself the small pleasure of rubbing the young girl's leg. His hand moved higher under the thin dress. She opened her eyes and glanced up at him. She had no fear of him since he had been so kind to her. It was so seldom that she came in contact with kindness that she didn't believe he would hurt her. From past experience, she knew that the man was feeling on her. Many times in the past, ever since she could remember, one of her mother's friends had put his hands on her in this fashion. Always after they drank too much, one of the men would try and feel her whenever her mother wasn't paying attention. She had never been hurt by it, so in her child's mind, she didn't have any reason to fear it. Nor did she dislike it, because attention was something she very seldom got. She could recall times when she had gone out of her way to sit on the lap of a man who she knew liked to rub on her. When he finished, he'd slip her a dime or nickel, depending on what kind of change he had in his pocket. Again, this man in the car found himself in the clutches of the strong drink. His hand began to ramble higher and higher under the child's dress. He fought with his desires, but since she wasn't putting up any resistance, he continued to roam. As Sandra felt his hand pushing the small panties aside, panic gripped her. Fear of the unknown overcame her, and she blurted out, "Please, mister, please don't hurt me." Her words had a sobering effect on him, and he snatched his hand from under her dress. As she stared up at him, he looked away, too ashamed to look at her. "I'll take you home," he murmured, so low that she hardly heard him. As he started up the motor, shame was a growing thing inside of him. Years later in life, whenever he remembered this night, shame would overcome him. He realized as he drove through the silent streets of L.A. that he had almost committed a crime that would have filled him with so much guilt and shame that he seriously doubted if he'd have been able to live with himself. Chapter 2. The chilling winter mornings were just about gone as Sandra stood on the corner of 48th Street and Hoover. But she still had one problem, her daily search for food. She was constantly hungry because seldom did she get enough to really fill her up. As she stopped in front of Sammy's liquor store, the hunger pains almost caused her to double up. Suddenly there was a knock on the window, and the sharp noise brought her out of her daydream of food. A table full of all kinds of food was what she always dreamed about. She glanced up and saw Sammy, the owner of the store, smiling kindly at her from inside. He motioned for the young girl to enter, and Sandra noticed as she came through that the store was empty. She grinned up at Sammy, and he smiled in return. "You want to sweep up today?" he asked in that funny way of his. Without replying, she ran into the back of the store and got the broom out. She knew where everything was kept. When she came back to the front of the store, Sammy was busy waiting on a customer. She began sweeping, and it didn't take long before she was finished with the light work he had asked her to do. When she came back from putting the broom up, Sammy asked, "How come you no go to school today?" His smile was broad on his wrinkled face, and his snow-white hair was still thick and bushy. Sandra just shrugged her shoulders. She didn't want to tell the kind old man that she had been too hungry when she got up to think of school. After looking in the refrigerator and finding it empty, as always, she had known that she couldn't sit in the classroom all day, not without lunch money. She didn't have to answer Sammy, though. He could tell from what she selected as pay for sweeping up what her problem was. He had known that the child was hungry as she stood outside the store. He had seen the look on too many faces when he was in a concentration camp in Germany. The look of hunger was the same, no matter where you were at. He felt sorry for the child, but there was nothing he could really do but help her out like he did whenever she came by. She was really too young for him to hire, so he gave her food whenever she came by. It wasn't necessary for her to sweep up for him, but she seemed to want to feel that she was earning her way. He watched her pick up a pack of cheap lunch meat, then some crackers. "Here," Sammy said as he walked over and got her a pop out of the box. Next, he picked up a cake and gave that to her, too. Sandra's eyes were shining as she left the store, clutching the food tightly to her thin chest. She almost ran all the way home. Sammy watched her leave with pity in his kind eyes. It was a shame, he knew. He knew the child's mother, a drunk who didn't care about anything but where her next drink was coming from. She had been in his store early that morning, buying her daily bottle of whiskey. He gritted his teeth and went back behind the counter. When Sandra arrived home, she hesitated briefly. She didn't want to run into her mother now. She listened outside the door for a minute, making sure there were no sounds from inside, then turned the knob and went in. The house was deserted, just as she'd hoped it would be. She carried her tightly clutched bundle into the kitchen and sat down. There was no bread, so she made small sandwiches with the crackers. She opened her pop. It was a treat, what with the cake and all. Sometimes when Sammy was busy with customers, she'd go in and steal a can of sardines or something else small. Then her conscience would bother her. Because Sammy was so good to her, she really hated to take anything from him without his knowing it. The sound of a key being put in the door caused her to jam the rest of the tiny sandwiches into her mouth. By the time her mother staggered into the kitchen, she had eaten up everything but the cake. Her mother, a thin, brown-complexioned woman, swayed on her feet, then rocked back in her high-heeled shoes. Her eyes were bloodshot, while the dress she wore was dirty. One of her stockings was rolled down halfway on her leg, while the other one was put on right. At one time, her mother could have been called slightly attractive. She had a small nose and her hair was a dark brown. But from the constant use of alcohol, her looks were deteriorating. And now a silence filled the small room, a waiting silence that stifled the air, heightened the glare of the ceiling light, moved the walls inward, sealing them in. "Well now, Miss Lady, why ain't you in school?" her mother asked with sarcasm. For a minute, Sandra started to lie, then decided on the truth. "I was hungry. When I got up, there wasn't nothing to eat, so since I didn't have lunch money, I didn't go." Just for a minute, her mother was quiet, taken aback by the answer. Then she put her hands on her hips. "You kids nowadays are full of shit," she yelled loudly. "When I was your age, we went hungry at times, but we took our asses to school. You didn't have lunch money. What the fuck do you think I am, a money tree? Hell, you ain't no little spoiled white kid. Lunch money my ass." She reached down and snatched up the cake. "You had enough money to buy this shit with. I know you, you little bitch. You've been going through my pocketbook taking my change. That's what you've been doing." She started to eat the cake as she rocked back on her heels. "I ain't took nothing from you," Sandra screamed as she jumped up and made a grab for the cake. "Give me back my cake!" She yelled loudly as her mother continued to cram the cake down her throat. "I'll give you hell and call it cake," her mother retorted as she pushed the screaming child away. As her mother made a motion towards the bottle of pop, Sandra leaped in front of her and snatched the pop out of her reach. She ran around the table attempting to drain the bottle dry. "You better not drink all that pop, you little bitch," her mother ordered sharply. Sandra continued to drain the bottle until it was empty, ignoring the order. She managed to keep the table between them as her mother continued trying to reach her. A loud knock on the door interrupted the fight before it could get worse. A loud man's voice could be heard. "Sandy, open the goddamn door," a man ordered. Though both women had the same name, most people called Sandra's mother Sandy instead of Sandra. As she staggered towards the door, she made Sandra a promise. "I ain't forgetting, little whore," she swore over her shoulder. Sandra wasn't worried about the threat. She knew her mother would either forget or be in a completely different mood by the time they met again. She watched as her mother opened the door and led the man in. He was carrying a bottle of whiskey. Sandy didn't even stop in the living room. They continued straight on to the bedroom. Then her mother came back out and got 2 glasses, ignoring her daughter completely, as if she was just another piece of the kitchen furniture. Sandra sat in the kitchen, not really knowing what to do. Now that she was full, she silently wished that she was in school. But then she remembered the way the kids talked about her clothes and decided that she didn't want to be in school. If she never went back to school, she'd be happy. The school children had started to call her Raggedy Ann, a nickname she would have rather done without. The sounds of the bed springs brought her back to reality. She knew then that she'd have to leave the house. She couldn't stand to hear the sounds her mother made when she was drunk and in her bedroom. Sandra quickly got up and left the tiny apartment, slamming the door behind her. She walked from Broadway down to 51st Street, all the way to Western, and then back. She stopped in a small store that was crowded and stole a small cherry pie. She went back out and down the street eating the pie. Later in the day, she went into a supermarket and stole 2 packs of cold lunch meat. She took this so that she'd have something to eat when she got up in the morning. She ate 1 package of the meat and saved the other one. What she wanted most, though, were some clothes. But she didn't know how to steal them. She knew that that would be the only way she'd ever get some. If she had some nice skirts, she'd be able to go to school without the kids getting down on her. The more she thought about it, the more she wanted the clothes. She remembered that there was a shopping center up on Slauson Avenue, so she slowly started walking in that direction. It didn't disturb her that it was over 20 blocks away. The thought of catching a bus was out of the question. It was something only the rich did, so she believed. At 10 years of age, she couldn't remember ever being on a bus. Her mother never had any reason to take her anywhere. She noticed older girls putting their thumbs out and getting rides, but that possibility didn't cross her mind. She believed she was too young and nobody would pick her up. Even though she was tall for her age, her chest was as flat as a boy's, and with the clothes she wore, she didn't appear too attractive. She would have had trouble trying to get a ride. She looked too much like a boy. An hour later, she reached the department store parking lot. She went in the back door of the large store. When she reached the children's department, it was crowded. She picked up an empty bag and walked around until she found the skirts and blouses. She didn't know what size she wore, so she held the skirts up in front of her. When she found what she thought would fit, she selected 4 of them and put them in her shopping bag. 2 black women shopping noticed the child stealing and laughed. But it frightened Sandra so that she only managed to stuff 2 blouses into the bag. She almost dropped the bag and ran, but she wanted the clothes too bad. The saleswomen in the department had noticed the child. Sandra walked back out the way she had come in, swinging her bag happily. Now she could go to school without any trouble. If she had enough money for lunch every day, she wouldn't have any problem, she reasoned, as she made her way out of the store. Chapter 3. By the time Sandra reached the age of 13, she had solved her lunch money problem. She knew how to steal now. She had been caught 5 times in the past 3 years, but it didn't disturb her once she knew what would happen. Most of the time, they'd turn her loose in the store after talking to her. Only one time had they taken her down to juvenile, and since they'd had so much trouble trying to reach her mother, the police women had just given up and sent her home. It wouldn't have made any difference whether or not they'd given her car fare, because she now knew how to stick her finger out and get a ride. With the short skirts she wore, no man would mistake her for a boy, even though she wore her hair in a short natural. When a stranger met Sandra, he or she was not overwhelmed by any sign of intellectual maturity. But on the other hand, she was a product of circumstances, which had been hard and were still hard. She still skipped school whenever she felt like it, not because of lunch money or hunger. Now it was because she wanted the time to go downtown and hustle the stores. Inside of her there was a driving desire to accumulate a large bankroll. She had a morbid fear of being completely broke. She hoarded money as if it might disappear. She would never allow herself to spend her last dollar. She always kept at least $2 or $3 hidden under her mattress at home. It was abnormal for a child of that age to be so concerned with money, but if she hadn't taken an interest in her own money affairs, she would have starved to death because her mother just didn't care. Or if she cared, she didn't stay sober long enough to follow up her good intentions. Sandra jumped out of the car on Western and waved merrily at the young brother who had given her the lift all the way from Hollywood and Vine to 38th Street and Western. She clutched the bag to her. Inside was the short leather coat a young prostitute had been worrying her to get. The price tag was $65, so she figured on making at least $30 off the white coat. As she attempted to cross the street, a Cadillac came tearing around the corner. As she jumped back out of the way, the rider on the passenger side tossed a package out the window. As she watched the package roll under a parked car, she almost got run over by a police car that came roaring around the corner behind the Cadillac. Some of the onlookers watched her curiously as she straightened back up, but she didn't care. She had what she wanted, even though she didn't really know what was in the small brown package. She rushed down the street, wanting to get away before the men in the Cadillac came back and tried to redeem their package. The little white skirt she wore flapped up high against her butt as she took long steps, putting as much distance between her and that corner as she could. She stopped on 41st Street and delivered the leather coat. "Honey, I I ain't got but $25 in the house, the young blonde prostitute stated, slowly fingering the soft leather. If it hadn't been for the package that was burning her pocket, Sandra would never have left the jacket. But now, all she wanted to do was get home and see what she had. Okay, I'll let it go for that this time, but don't do that no more. If you state a price, I look for you to pay it if I get the piece you want, Sandra warned the girl coldly. As Sandra let herself out of the woman's apartment, she overheard the girl say to her pimp, who had been watching the transaction, "That's gonna be one cold-hearted bitch when she gets older." "She'd be a bad bitch for somebody if she wasn't so damn young," the pimp replied loudly. "Give her a couple more years, and I might shoot at her myself." When Sandra reached the street, she took the back way. She hurried down to Van Ness and started walking. A young brother drove past slowly. His car broke down in the back, showing that he was a lowrider. He gave her the eye, and she stuck out her hand. He quickly slammed on his brakes and waited for her. She ran out to the car and jumped in. As soon as he got a close look at her, he cursed. "Shit, I thought you were older, baby. You ain't hardly over 12, are you?" "I'm 16, she lied quickly. "But if you don't want to give me the lift, that's up to you." She didn't make any attempt to get out, though. He grinned. 16, my ass. If you're a day over 14, I'll give you some cat. She didn't understand what he meant, but she replied, "Look, man, if you want, I'll pay you for the ride. How about that?" "You got some cash, honey?" he asked quickly. Then he pulled into a gas station. "How much gas should I get?" he asked and grinned. Sandra removed a $5 bill. "How about $2 worth?" she inquired. She wasn't frightened of him. She was used to dealing with young men. He didn't seem to be over 18. She stared at him with her large eyes. She had the same eyes her mother had, large bedroom eyes. He looked away. "Sure, baby, $2 would be fine." He started to say something else, but the arrival of the gas station attendant interrupted him. "Would you stop and let me pick up the Temptations' latest album at the record shop?" she asked lightly, not really caring if he stopped or not. He hesitated briefly, then introduced himself. "Most of my friends call me Fast Eddie, honey. What do they call you?" "Sandra," she replied, not bothering to offer any other information.
No.
"Well, Sandy," he began, but she interrupted sharply. "It ain't no Sandy, mister. It's Sandra." Her voice was sharp. Eddie glanced at her quickly. "Damn, baby, I do believe you are 16. Ain't no kid gonna speak to no man in that tone of voice. In fact," he added, "when I use that tone, I'm either speaking to my dog or to someone I don't like." "I'm sorry," she stated, then continued, "I just don't like for anyone to call me Sandy. That's my mother's name, and I don't want to use her name no way, no kind of way, if you know what I mean." "All right," Eddie said easily. "It don't make me no kind of difference one way or the other. What I'm interested in is what you going to give me for taking you to the record shop, then taking you home. How about if you just keep the change from the $5 bill? Would that be all right?" Eddie shrugged his wide shoulders. "That's cool with me," he stated, as he mentally counted the money he had in his pocket. He realized quickly that he'd still be $3 short on his fix money. Well, he reasoned, $3 was easier to hustle up than the whole $10 that he needed every day. After Sandra picked up her record, Eddie dropped her off at the dilapidated tenant building that she stayed in. He glanced at the building and commented, "Your landlord must have something against paint, huh?" She hadn't understood what he meant, and as she turned and stared up at him, he just shrugged his shoulders as he realized that she hadn't understood. "That's okay, baby," he said lightly. "If it doesn't bother you, it sure ain't no sweat off my nuts." Again, she didn't understand him. At school, the teachers thought she was a truculent child in some instances, and in others they just believed she was a half-wit. But in both cases, they were wrong. What Sandra did in school was all for a reason. Ever since she had been sent to school in clothes that made the other kids laugh, she had started to pretend that she was retarded so that she wouldn't be called on and made to stand in front of the whole class. What she had started continued to follow her as she went through school. The teachers expected it from her, so they didn't disturb her. Some of them even believed she couldn't read, while many of her classmates knew that she skipped school sometimes so that she could go sit in the public library and read all day. What the teachers didn't realize was the fact that she had been so ashamed of the other kids' comments that she had developed a protective schizophrenia to meet the problem. When called on by a teacher to stand up and speak, she spoke in a low voice and ran her words together so that no one could really understand what she was saying. It became so exasperating that the teacher would stop calling on her. But now, as she sat in the car in front of her house listening to Eddie and not understanding what he meant, she wondered if she was really dumb. She was not pretending illiteracy now. She just couldn't understand what he meant. "Okay, baby," he said as she opened the car door. "I'll be seeing you around." As soon as she got out, he pulled off, not realizing that he had left a mixed-up child behind. But what she couldn't understand was his cold remark about the building she stayed in. She didn't have any standards to go by. Every place she had ever lived in had been run down. She didn't understand anything about a ghetto because she had never lived in anything but a ghetto. Her world was small, and being an only child, she had no one to talk to. She lived in her books, the ones she stole from the library. They were her real world. When Sandra reached her apartment, she could hear the noise coming from inside. Her mother was entertaining again. For a second, she wasn't going to go in, but then she remembered the package she had picked up. She opened the door and entered. Couples danced together, closely, as the record player blasted out the latest hit. Sandy spotted her daughter as soon as she entered. Noticing the album she carried, Sandy rushed over. "What's that you're carrying?" she asked loudly. Sandra passed over the new album and continued on into her bedroom. She didn't feel like arguing with her mother today. In a minute, the sound of the new album filled the apartment. Sandra sat on the bed and opened the package. A number of small balloons rolled out. Each one contained something. Now she knew it was dope. She counted the balloons. There were 20 of them. She didn't even bother to open one. She had seen the boys at school open one up and snort the white stuff that was inside the balloon. She carried the package to her closet and hid it way in the back where she knew her mother would never find it. Then she quickly forgot about it. There was too much noise coming from the group of adults, so she changed clothes quickly and left. Her mother didn't bother to inquire as to where she was going because she didn't really care. Sandy knew that her daughter was stealing, even though Sandra had never told her that she was. But from the clothes she brought home, her mother knew. But as long as her daughter continued to bring her a dress home now and then, it didn't make any difference. If she ended up in reform school, it was her own problem, not Sandy's. That was the way her mother looked at it. After Sandra left the house, she walked around aimlessly until she found herself in front of Sammy's store. He grinned at her as she came in and bought a pop and cake. "Hey, Sandra," he said on the spur of the moment. "How'd you like a job in the store in the evenings after school?" He was surprised at his own question. One moment he was thinking that she was growing up, looking nice in her neat little skirt, and the next moment he was offering her a job. "Sure, Sammy," she replied quickly. "I'd like that fine." Frequently things happen in life that will change the future of a person. This was to be a big step in Sandra's life, one she would always remember. In the following week, Sandra would show up at the store with her school books in her arms. Sammy's wife would sometimes be in the store, and on those days, she would take Sandra in the back of the store and both of them would study Sandra's English book. Sammy's wife was from the old country and wanted to learn to speak English, so Sandra helped her. But in helping, she helped herself. In a matter of a month, there was an astonishing change that took place in Sandra. Even her teachers couldn't believe it. In fact, they didn't want to believe that what they had been so sure was a half-witted child was actually one with an agile mind. One reason for the abrupt change was that Sandra didn't have anything to be ashamed of anymore. Her clothes were as good or better now than most of the girls in the class. So she wasn't ashamed to stand up in front of the class and recite. Only now, instead of saying, "If'n, eatin', or show 'em," she spoke perfect English. Clear, bright, and articulate was Sandra's speech. But it shouldn't have surprised anyone, because she was a voracious reader. Actually, the only ones surprised were her school teachers, because her schoolmates had known all along that Sandra was anything but dumb. One Friday, when Sandra showed up for work, Sammy came quickly from behind the counter. "Come, I want to show you something," he said, and led her from the store, leaving his wife in charge. He took her to the nearest bank and showed her how to open an account. Since it was payday for her, he put $5 in her account. When Sandra left the bank, her eyes were bright. She had found a new experience in life, something that would always keep the fear of hunger at bay. As long as she had money in the bank, she'd never have to worry, she reasoned. As they left the bank, Sammy glanced down at her and grinned. He knew her mother was starting to take most of her paycheck, so he decided to show her how to put her money where her own mother couldn't reach it. He didn't realize just how much of a problem he had solved for Sandra. Chapter 4. The summer went by smoothly for Sandra. She had stopped stealing because there was no reason for it now. She had all the money she needed, and her clothes were more than adequate for her needs. With an abundance of food, she had started to fill out, all except her breasts, which were going to be small anyway. She ate constantly, always nibbling on something, until Sammy had commented, "One day, Sandra, if you continue to eat like that, you're going to weigh over 300 pounds. She laughed and continued to eat. Eddie had stopped in the store one day for some wine and found her there alone. Sammy was in the back of the store. "Well, well, if it ain't Youngblood. What's happening, sweet thing? I know you ain't forgot me." "No, I ain't forgot you," she replied softly. "Good, good," he replied, then walked out of the store without paying her for the bottle of wine or cigarettes she had given him across the counter. Sandra didn't say anything. She walked over and got her purse and counted the money out for the wine and cigarettes. Sammy had watched the whole thing from the lookout slot in the back of the store. He watched as she counted out the change from her purse and put it in the register. He smiled softly, and impatiently he brushed back a tear that appeared in the corner of his eye. He loved honesty. It was a quality in a person that always won him over. He came out from the back of the store. "You know, Sandra, I've been thinking. You've worked for us quite a while now. Maybe it's time we gave you a little raise. Maybe $10 more a week, okay?" Sandra glanced up into his kind face. She was so glad that he hadn't seen what had just happened. She didn't know how she could have explained Eddie taking the stuff out without paying for it. Sammy was so kind that at times when she thought about how it would have been to have a father, she wished that he would have been like Sammy. While working in the store, she was never aware of a racial problem until one of her mother's drunk friends came in and called Sammy a name. When she blushed in shame, Sammy looked at her and laughed it off. What they said didn't disturb him, he said, because a drunk rarely knew what he was saying anyway. But she was mad the rest of the day. Only when Eddie came in the store was Sammy different. He watched Eddie closely. Sometimes Eddie would pick her up after work. "What's with that honky?" Eddie would ask. "He acts like he's your father or something." "Don't call him no honky," she'd reply hotly. "I mean it, Eddie. He's got a name, and it sure ain't honky." Okay, baby. You still gonna loan me the $8? He inquired. He'd blown his loan one night by referring to Sammy as a peckerwood. Sandra had got hot and jumped out of the car. Now he knew that if he wanted his blow money, it was best not to talk about the old white dude. Sandra was a strange young girl. At times, she didn't act like a young girl. He knew she liked his company, but when he tried to get close to her, she froze up. He could kiss her, but that was as far as it went. He was beginning to believe she was really a virgin. "What you wantin' with the money, Eddie? I really want to know what you're doing with it. You don't drink that much wine, so it must be stuff, huh?" she asked sharply. Eddie glanced up quickly. At first he was furious with her for asking. Then he decided that he didn't give a damn anyway. He only got about $10 a week out of her, so he didn't have that much to lose. "Yeah, baby, I want to buy me a fix," he stated harshly, not caring one way or the other what she thought about it. On the other hand, Sandra didn't care either. She had wanted to save the $8 he'd asked for so that she could put it in the bank on Monday. She gave a sigh of relief. "Well, if that's all you want, I got a balloon at home I found. You can have that, and I'll save my $8. "Shit!" Eddie exclaimed loudly. "You probably ain't found nothing but some damn bunk. I want some dope, girl. I don't want no bullshit." "It ain't bunk, it's dope," she replied coldly. "If it was junk, I'd have thrown it away long ago." "How you know what it is? You don't use." Eddie continued the argument. "Well, if you don't want it, it's up to you," she answered coldly. "But I bet it's more in the balloon I'm gonna give you than in the one you was gonna buy." Eddie didn't answer. He just turned and started driving in the direction of her home. When they reached her apartment building, he asked, "Can I come up and fix there? I got my outfit with me." Sandra hesitated briefly. "Well, I guess it would be all right if my mother ain't home." She wasn't worried about her mother catching Eddie fixing. She was worried about the hell she knew her mother would raise when she found Eddie in the apartment. Sandra had never taken a boy to their place, so she knew her mother would have something to say. Since it was payday, she didn't have to worry, though. A few dollars would smooth over her mother's hurt feelings. Eddie got out of the car and followed her into the old apartment building. The stairs they went up were run down and needed repair. He stood back as she stopped in front of the apartment and listened. Then she opened the door. The inside wasn't any different than any of the other crummy apartments he had been inside. "Have a seat," Sandra said after they entered, and she went on into a bedroom. In a second she was back, carrying a red balloon in her hand. Eddie's eyes got big as he saw the size of the balloon. "It must be at least a spoon," he said to himself as he stared at the object in her hand. She tossed it to him. He caught it and felt how full it was. With his teeth he bit it open and the dope fell out. Sandra gave him a piece of newspaper to hold under the bag. The stuff tasted bitter and dark.
No.
Then he slowly removed his outfit from his pocket. "You better take it in the bathroom in case my mother comes in," Sandra cautioned. Yeah, I know what you mean," he said, not really knowing, too concerned with the dope in his hand. Sandra followed him into the toilet. She stood back, leaning against the wall, and watched him shake out a small amount from the balloon into his cooker. He removed matches from his pocket and struck 3 of them and held them under his cooker. The dope inside the empty wine top dissolved quickly. He set the cooker down on top of the toilet seat and removed his belt. He twisted it around his arm, slowly squeezing his fist until he found a vein that suited his need. Sandra watched closely. It was the first time she had ever seen anyone really cook up some dope, though she had heard about it often enough. She watched, fascinated, as he drew up the drug into the needle, then stuck it into his arm. He got a hit quickly. Blood rushed back into the bulb, and he slowly removed the tie from around his arm, then shot the dope. Before he could take the needle out of his arm, his eyes closed and his head dropped down on his chest. Instantly, Sandra became frightened. "Eddie! Eddie! You got to wake up!" she yelled. When that didn't do any good, she reached over and pinched his arm until he lifted his head. His eyes rolled back in his head until she could only see the whites of them. She regained some sort of focus. She didn't stop working on his face until he opened his eyes and spoke. "God damn, that showing the hell ain't no bunk. Shit. It must be raw dope. That shit can be cut, baby. You don't know what you got there, do you?" He stared at her foolishly, trying to get his mind right. "Yeah, I know what I got now," Sandra said sharply, her eyes never leaving his face. The possibilities of what she had didn't escape her whatsoever. "You got some more of this?" he inquired, showing that he truly was himself again. "No, all I had was that balloon I gave you. You want to give me a little of that back?" Sandra asked quickly. "That wouldn't be right," Eddie replied. "You said I could have the balloon, and I didn't shoot it all because I was trying to save some. Now you want me to give that back to you." He didn't bother to add that if he had shot it all, he'd more than likely have been dead. Eddie knew the dope was raw, uncut dope. The bag he had would bring him close to $200 once he cut it and sold it himself. He decided his best bet was to get away from Sandra as fast as he could. That way, she wouldn't bother about asking for any of the stuff back. Sandra had to hold back a smile as she watched Eddie prepare to leave. He rolled up the rest of the dope, making sure the balloon was folded inside some newspaper so that whatever drug fell out would still be wrapped up inside the newspaper. He almost ran out of the apartment since he was in such a hurry to find out how much of a cut the dope would stand. Sandra knew from his actions she had something good. She took a hot bath and went to bed, waiting patiently for the next day when she'd be in school. She knew just how to get rid of the dope. She had thought about it for the past few months, but had never put her plan into action because she hadn't known just what she had. Now that she knew, she didn't waste any time. The next day in school, she searched the corridors until she found the boy she had been looking for. Chink was a young boy who looked so much like a monkey that the rest of the kids had started calling him Chink. She had started speaking to the bashful young boy months ago. Chink wasn't in any of her classes, but she knew him and knew about him. He was the school's pusher. He was a short, dark-complexioned boy with long, muscular arms. He was strong and was known to be a mean fighter, but when it came to girls, he was scared to death of them. He couldn't look one in the eye. He danced from one foot to the other whenever one talked to him, which was rare because the girls acted like they were afraid of him. When Sandra approached him in the hall, she had a hard time keeping him cornered while she talked to him. "I want to see you after school, man. You hear me, Chink? I want you to wait for me outside the front door." Chink heard her all right, but he couldn't stand still. He wasn't really frightened. He just didn't know how to act around girls. Since he lived with just his father behind the pool room his father ran, he never was near any women. He liked Sandra. She was one of the few girls, if not the only one in the whole school, who spoke to him every time she saw him, and it didn't seem to make any difference to her who she was with. If she was with other girls, even though it made Chink nervous when she was, she would still go out of her way to speak to him. Now she wanted him to wait for her outside of school. He knew that he'd do it, but he hated the idea of it. Standing out there where everyone could see him, waiting for a girl. "I'll be looking for you, man," she said, leaving him in the hall. He sighed with relief as she departed, but he was still wondering what she wanted. It couldn't be dope, he told himself, because he knew everybody who used in the school, and she didn't hang out with none of that crowd. His mind was in a turmoil the rest of the day, wondering what was the reason. It didn't bother his schoolwork, though, because he was another one of the practicing illiterate children that filled the ghetto schools. Chink suffered from the same problems that Sandra had. When he was younger, he had a clothes problem, but his main problem was his face. He hated the ridicule so much that he tried to become invisible. He couldn't stand for a teacher to call on him in a classroom, so he pretended to be mentally disturbed. With his looks, it wasn't hard to fool the teachers. Most of the young white school teachers couldn't stand to look upon his features without shivering anyway, and he knew this. He could sense it. As soon as one of them turned away from him, shaking, he knew what the reason was. He couldn't change himself to please them, so he tried to make himself invisible. The day passed slowly for Sandra. She constantly watched the clock on the wall of her homeroom. At 10 minutes to 3, she gathered her books together. She didn't want anything to slow her down. At 2 minutes to 3, she got up and moved to an empty desk near the door. When the bell rang, she was the first one out of the homeroom. She raced toward the front door. She had just about reached it when she saw Chink coming from the opposite direction. She stopped and waited for him. Chink was in such a hurry that he didn't notice her and the bunch of children rushing for the door. He went out the door and then stopped and stood around, not knowing what to do. He felt like everyone was watching him. He would have bolted and run, but his curiosity and his humble respect for Sandra wouldn't allow him to take such a cowardly way out. He saw her as soon as... "Hey, big man," she said lightly as she came up. "What you trying to do, ignore me?" She was only joking with him, but her words started him to shifting from one foot to the other. Chink glanced at her, then looked away. He couldn't stand to look her in the eyes. "What's wrong, boy?" she said, still joking with him. "'Cause you got on them sharp-ass threads, you think you big shit, huh?" Now she had him. Chink dressed above average. His clothes cost more than any of the other kids could afford. He dressed sharp every day, but he didn't want to be reminded of it. Her direct attack embarrassed him, and he blushed down to his shoes. His constant movement gave Sandra a feeling of being a complete woman. She knew he was embarrassed by being near her. It was a new experience for her, the total power of a woman over a man. She enjoyed the feeling. When some friends passed and yelled out at them, she enjoyed his embarrassment. She took his arm and wrapped hers around it. "You gonna walk me to work," she stated. She felt his muscular arm tighten up under her fingers, but he followed her on down the street. He kept his head down and shuffled along beside her. When one of the addicts came up and spoke to him, he didn't know how to handle it with Sandra beside him. She handled it for him. "Go on, man, and take care of your business. I'll be waiting right here." She stopped and leaned against a rotting fence. Chink walked off a few feet, removed a small balloon, and gave it to the young drug addict. Sandra watched as money was exchanged between them. When Chink returned, she gave him a big smile, revealing beautiful, white, evenly spaced teeth. "Don't worry, man. That's what I wanted to talk to you about," she said lightly. Chink stopped in his tracks. He wasn't going to start her off on drugs no matter how much she begged. He really liked and respected Sandra. He remembered when she used to come to school as raggedy as he was, and he knew that her mother hadn't bought the nice clothes she wore. He respected her for being able to go out into the streets and get what she wanted, but he wasn't about to make a drug addict out of her. "If it's drugs you want, gal, I ain't about to sell you none," he stated point blank. For the first time, he glanced up and looked her directly in the eyes. "I mean it, Sandra." "Well, I'll be damned," Sandra replied, surprised. "But it ain't no drugs that I want to buy. I want you to sell some drugs for me,"
Make a wish.
she stated as she took his arm and started him on down the street. Now it was Chink's turn to be surprised. He stared at her with his mouth open, unable to speak. "Boy, if you don't close your mouth," she said lightly, "you gonna end up catching you a mouthful of flies." She laughed, then removed the balloon from her bra and gave it to him. "I don't know how many times you can cut it. All I know is it can be cut, Chink. I done already had an addict tested, and he almost fell out because it was too strong." They walked along in silence with Chink carrying the dope. He finally asked, "Where did the dope come from?" By the time they reached the store where Sandra worked, she had explained everything to Chink, even to how much dope she had hidden. For some reason, she believed she could be honest with him. She took him on as a partner. They shook hands outside the store. Then Chink went on his way to find out just how much cut the dope could stand. The next morning, before going to school, Sandra dressed carefully in an expensive pants outfit she had stolen over the weekend. It was a form-fitting outfit, black, with a white blouse and black silk jacket. The price tag had been $120. When she had inquired about it, the salesgirl had almost laughed in her face, knowing that the skinny black girl in front of her couldn't afford the expensive outfit. She had made a big joke out of it, displaying it as if she knew she had a sale until Sandra had made up her mind to steal the outfit, just to teach the girl a lesson. Sandra knew she couldn't go back into the store again, since the girl had more than likely missed the outfit as soon as Sandra had left. Sandra glanced in her cracked mirror at herself, and she liked what she saw. She quickly gathered up her books and left the apartment, not knowing if her mother had come in or not. As soon as she came out of the apartment building, she found Chink waiting on her. "Hi, honey," she said sweetly, causing him to drop his head and blush. She examined him while his head was down. He was wearing a pair of gray pants with a matching leather jacket. The clothes, being expensive, covered his muscular body to perfection. He took her books from her. "That stuff was sure enough smoking, Sandra. It knocked them junkies to their knees," he said, and held out a roll of money. She slowly counted the roll of money. "It's over $200 here," she said, surprised. "You ain't took your share out yet, have you?" "Oh, no, Sandra. I can wait till next time before I takes out mine," he said, speaking flatly with his head down. Sandra counted the money again, then split it in half. "Here. I told you yesterday that we was going to cut the money in half," she said, as she pushed his share into his hand. Then, as he took the money, she reached over and lifted up his chin. "Listen, Chink, when you talk to me, don't give me that shuffling shit you use in school. And quit speaking like you just come from Georgia or Mississippi, boy. You ain't country, so stop acting like it. Be a man. I don't like boys," she stated coldly. As they continued on toward school, he lifted his head up and took pride in the fact that he was walking next to the best-dressed girl in school. He noticed the large, mannish-looking hat she wore. It made her look like a boy, but the black outfit she wore was all female. Every line of her slim body was shown to its best advantage, and he gloried in the fact that he was walking beside this young, fine, brown frame. When they passed other kids and the kids yelled out at them, he found himself walking in a more caddish manner. Sandra noticed the change in him, but remained silent. For some reason, she found herself drawn to the husky boy next to her. There was nothing handsome about him, but he wasn't as ugly as the silly girls in school liked to pretend he was. His long arms were loaded with muscle, and when she looked in his eyes, she found them to be bright and alert, with a smoldering intelligence that he couldn't hide. From that day on, they walked to school and came home together. Some days, she'd lead him over to the library. At first, he had rebelled, until she picked out certain books and made him promise her that he'd take them home and read them. And once she started him reading, he was addicted. He sometimes took her arm and led her over to the library, where he'd wait patiently until she picked out some books for him. The summer passed swiftly for them until all of her dope